At the edge of the square, near the stone steps of the Veterans Memorial Hall, stood Walter Grayson. He was 82, though his broad shoulders still hinted at the strength of youth. His jacket, a worn olive drab, hung loose on his frame, the cuffs frayed from years of use. A faded tattoo of an anchor peeked from beneath his sleeve, barely visible against his weathered skin. In his hand, he clutched a folded piece of paper, its edges yellowed, the ink smudged but legible. His eyes, sharp despite the lines etched around them, scanned the poster taped to the hall's door. Veterans Day ceremony, by invitation only. Walter had heard about the event weeks ago, whispered about in the diner over cups of black coffee. A big deal, they said. A general was coming to town, some high-ranking officer from Fort Bragg, to honor local veterans. There'd be speeches, a band, even a new plaque unveiled at the memorial. Walter hadn't planned to attend. Crowds weren't his thing, but the letter in his pocket had changed his mind. It arrived yesterday, slipped under his door by an unknown hand. Addressed to CPL, Walter Grayson, USMC. It was an invitation, formal and typed, but it felt personal, like a summons from the past. He climbed the steps, his bad knee protesting with each one. The door was locked, but a young woman in a crisp blazer stood nearby, holding a clipboard. She glanced at him, her smile polite but brief. "Name?" she asked, pen poised. "Walter Grayson," he said, his voice low, steady. He held out the letter. She scanned her list, her brow furrowing. "I'm sorry, sir, I don't see you here. This is a private event, invited guests only." Walter's grip tightened on the letter. "Got this yesterday, says I'm invited." She took the paper, her eyes skimming it. "This doesn't have an official seal. I'm not sure where it came from, but it's not on our system. I'm sorry, you'll have to leave." He stood still, the words sinking in. The cold air seemed to sharpen, pressing against his chest. He wanted to argue, to show her the tattoo, the scars beneath his shirt, the memories that woke him at night. But he didn't. He nodded once, turned, and started down the steps. His boots echoed softly, the only sound louder than the flag above. Across the square, a group of teenagers laughed, their voices carrying over the hum of the town. A jogger brushed past, not sparing him a glance. Walter felt the weight of invisibility, the kind that comes with age, with a past no one asks about. He tucked the letter into his pocket and headed toward Millie's, where at least the coffee was hot and the waitresses knew his name. Inside the diner, the air was warm, thick with the scent of bacon and syrup. Walter slid into his usual booth by the window, the vinyl seat creaking under him. He set the letter on the table, smoothing it flat. It was dated 1969, sent from a fire base in Vietnam, written in his own hand to his mother. He hadn't read it in years, but last night, after finding the invitation, he'd pulled it from the box under his bed. The words were simple, practical. "I'm okay, Ma. Don't worry. Tell Dad the crops will be fine." But between the lines was the truth. The jungle heat, the crack of gunfire, the weight of a rifle in his hands. He'd been 20 then, a Marine corporal leading a squad through hell. He didn't write about the medals, the ones he kept hidden in that same box. They didn't matter then, and they didn't matter now. "Morning, Walt," called Sarah, the waitress, pouring him a coffee without asking. "You look like you're carrying the world today." He managed a half smile. "Just the past, Sarah." She chuckled, unaware of the truth in his words, and moved to the next table. Walter sipped his coffee, staring out at the square. The Veterans Hall was filling up now, cars pulling in, men and women in dress uniforms stepping out. He recognized a few. Locals who'd served in Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan. Younger faces, their pride worn openly. He didn't begrudge them. But the letter in his pocket burned, a reminder of a war no one talked about anymore. He was halfway through his coffee when the door chimed and a young man walked in. He was in his 20s, tall, with a buzz cut and a posture that screamed military. His uniform was spotless, the insignia of a captain gleaming on his collar. He scanned the diner, his eyes landing on Walter. For a moment, their gazes met, and Walter felt a flicker of recognition, though he couldn't place it. The captain approached, his boots clicking on the linoleum. "Corporal Grayson?" the captain asked, his voice firm but respectful. Walter blinked, setting down his mug. "Haven't been called that in a while." The captain extended a hand. Captain Daniel Hayes, sir. I was hoping to find you here. Walter shook his hand, calluses meeting calluses. You with the ceremony? Yes, sir. I'm giving the keynote today. But I'm here because of you. He gestured to the letter on the table. May I? Walter hesitated, then slid the paper across. Hayes read it carefully, his expression unreadable. When he looked up, his eyes were steady. This letter was in the archives at Quantico. I found it while researching for today's speech. It's why I sent you the invitation. Walter's throat tightened. You sent it? Hayes nodded. I'm sorry about the mix-up at the hall. That was my fault. I meant for you to be there, front row, not turned away. Walter leaned back, the words sinking in. He wasn't used to this. Someone seeking him out, someone caring about a piece of paper from 50 years ago. Why me? He asked. Hayes set the letter down gently. Because of what you did. Hill 875, 1967. You led your squad out of an ambush. Saved 6 men. Got a silver star for it, though I bet you never told anyone. Walter's jaw tightened. He hadn't thought about Hill 875 in years, not consciously. But it was there, always. The screams, the mud, the weight of decisions no 20-year-old should make. Just did my job, he muttered. Hayes leaned forward, his voice low but firm. With respect, sir, that's not just a job. And today, we're going to make sure people know it. Walter didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to being seen, not like this. He glanced out the window where the square was now bustling with people heading to the ceremony. A few veterans stood by the memorial, heads bowed, their shadows long in the morning light. Come with me, Hayes said, standing. Please. It's not just about you. It's about everyone who's been forgotten. Walter hesitated. The diner felt safe, familiar. Out there was a crowd, eyes, attention he'd spent decades avoiding. But something in Hayes's voice, the same quiet conviction Walter had once carried, made him stand. He tucked the letter into his pocket and followed. The square was alive now, the air filled with the hum of voices and the brassy notes of a band warming up. The Veterans Hall loomed ahead, its stone facade etched with names Walter knew by heart. He'd traced them once, years ago, when the memorial was new, his fingers lingering on the ones he'd lost. Hayes led him past the clipboard woman, who looked flustered but said nothing as they entered. Inside, the hall was packed. Rows of chairs faced a stage where a podium stood, draped with a flag. Veterans in uniforms, families, town officials, all turned to watch as Hayes led Walter to the front row. Whispers followed, a ripple of curiosity. Walter kept his eyes forward, his hands clasped to hide their tremor. The ceremony began with the national anthem, the notes echoing off the high ceiling. Walter stood, his hand over his heart, the familiar words stirring something deep. When the music faded, Hayes took the stage. He spoke of service, of sacrifice, of the debt owed to those who carried the weight of war. Then he paused, his gaze finding Walter. Today, Hayes said, we honor a man who embodies that sacrifice. Corporal Walter Grayson, United States Marine Corps, Vietnam, 1967. He led his men through an ambush on Hill 875, under fire, with no regard for his own safety. 6 men came home because of him. He was awarded the Silver Star, but he never sought recognition. He carried his story quietly, as so many do. The room was silent, every eye on Walter. He felt exposed, raw, but Hayes's voice held him steady. I found a letter, Hayes continued, written by Corporal Grayson to his mother. It's simple, humble, like the man himself. But it tells us who he is. A man who served, who survived, and who deserves our respect. Hayes stepped down from the podium and approached Walter. In his hand was a small box, polished wood with a brass clasp. He opened it, revealing a replica of the Silver Star, gleaming under the hall's lights. This is for you, sir, Hayes said, loud enough for all to hear, and it's long overdue. He saluted, sharp and precise, holding it until Walter almost instinctively returned the gesture. The room erupted in applause, a wave of sound that crashed over Walter, overwhelming but warm. He took the box, his fingers brushing the metal, and for the first time in years, he felt the weight of his past lift just a little. Hayes leaned in, his voice low. There's more. Look outside. Walter turned to the window. Beyond the glass, the crowd had gathered around the memorial. A new plaque gleamed in the sunlight, its inscription too far to read but unmistakable in purpose. Hayes guided him out, the crowd parting as they approached. The plaque read, "In honor of Corporal Walter Grayson, USMC, and all who served in silence." Walter stood frozen, the words blurring as his eyes stung. He didn't cry. He hadn't in years, but the tightness in his chest was close enough. The crowd was quiet now, their faces a mix of awe and shame, as if seeing him for the first time. A child, no older than 10, stepped forward, holding a single daisy from the square's garden. She placed it at the base of the plaque, her small hand steady. "Thank you," she whispered, and Walter nodded, unable to speak. The ceremony continued, but Walter barely heard it. He stood by the plaque, the letter still in his pocket, its words no longer a burden, but a bridge. He thought of Hill 875, of the men he'd saved, the ones he couldn't. He thought of his mother, reading his words in a farmhouse long gone. And he thought of this moment, this town, this captain who'd seen him when no one else had. As the crowd dispersed, Hayes stayed by his side. "You gave me something to aim for, sir," he said. "I hope you know that." Walter looked at him, seeing the boy he'd been, the man he'd become. "You've done enough," he said, his voice rough but steady. "More than enough." The sun climbed higher, warming the square. Walter lingered by the plaque, his fingers tracing the letters of his name. For the first time in decades, he felt seen, not as a hero, but as a man who'd done his best. And in that moment, Willow Creek felt a little different, a little kinder, as if the town itself had remembered something it had forgotten. This is the first part of Walter Grayson's story, a reminder that heroes walk among us, often unnoticed, carrying their past in silence. At Hoffman's Stories, we share tales of quiet courage to inspire you to see the unseen in your own community. Subscribe to read the rest of Walter's journey and discover more stories that honor the power of compassion and respect. Captain Daniel Hayes remained at his side, his uniform crisp despite the long morning. The young officer's presence was steady, grounding. Like an anchor in a storm, Walter hadn't realized he was weathering. The child's daisy, placed so carefully at the plaque's base, swayed in the breeze, its white petals stark against the gray stone. Walter's chest tightened, not with the familiar ache of memory, but with something new, something like hope. "You didn't have to do this," Walter said, his voice rough, barely above a whisper. He gestured to the plaque, the crowd, the box, with the Silver Star replica still in his hand. Hayes shook his head. "Yes, I did, sir. It's not just about you. It's about making sure no one else gets forgotten." Walter looked at him, searching for the boy behind the captain's steady gaze. He saw it in the slight crease of worry at the corner of Hayes's eyes, the earnestness that hadn't been worn away by years or cynicism. It reminded him of himself, decades ago, before the jungle, before the weight of names etched in stone. The square was quieter now, the band packing up, their instruments glinting in the fading light. A few people approached, hesitant at first, then bolder. An older woman, her hair pinned neatly under a scarf, clasped Walter's hand. "My brother was in Vietnam," she said, her voice trembling. "He didn't come home. Thank you for what you did." Walter nodded, unsure what to say. He wasn't used to gratitude, not like this. "I'm sorry about your brother," he managed, and she squeezed his hand before stepping away. Others followed. A veteran in a wheelchair, his cap adorned with pins from Desert Storm, a young couple, their toddler tugging at their hands, even the clipboard woman from earlier, who mumbled an apology before hurrying off. Each encounter chipped away at the walls Walter had built, the ones that kept him quiet, separate, safe. He stood taller, his shoulders squaring as if remembering the Marine he'd been. Hayes watched, his expression unreadable but warm. "You see it, don't you?" he said. "They're starting to understand." Walter didn't answer, but he felt it. The shift in the air, the way eyes lingered on him now, not with pity or indifference, but with respect. He glanced at the plaque again, then at the letter in his pocket. It was still there, folded and worn, a tether to 1969. He hadn't read it aloud in years, hadn't wanted to. But now, with the crowd's eyes on him, with Hayes's quiet encouragement, He felt the urge to speak. Mind if I say something? Walter asked, his voice steadier than he expected. Hayes gestured to the podium, still set up near the memorial. It's yours, sir. Walter climbed the steps, his bad knee protesting but not stopping him. The microphone hummed faintly as he adjusted it, the sound drawing the remaining crowd closer. He pulled the letter from his pocket, unfolding it with care. The paper trembled slightly in his hands, not from nerves but from the weight of what it held. I'm not much for speeches, he began, his voice carrying across the square, but this letter, it's from me, to my mother, back in '69. I was in Vietnam, just a kid, trying to keep my squad alive. I didn't say much in it, didn't want her to worry. But I want to read a piece now, if you'll bear with me. He cleared his throat and his eyes scanning the faded ink. Ma, we're holding up okay. The jungle's hot, but we're tougher. Tell Dad I'll be back to help with the harvest. He paused, the words heavier than he remembered. The crowd was silent, their faces a blur of anticipation and empathy. I didn't tell her about the firefights, he continued, or the men we lost. I didn't tell her about Hill 875, where we got pinned down for 2 days. I didn't tell her I was scared, but I carried her letters, and they kept me going. They reminded me there was a home to get back to. He folded the letter, tucking it away. I came home. A lot of my friends didn't. This plaque. He gestured to it, his voice catching. It's not just for me. It's for them. For everyone who carried something and kept quiet about it. The crowd erupted in applause, softer this time, but no less heartfelt. Walter stepped down, his heart pounding, and Hayes was there, his hand steady on Walter's shoulder. That was perfect, sir, he said. Walter managed a nod, his throat too tight for words. He looked out at the square where the last of the sunlight painted the flag in hues of red and gold. The moment felt bigger than him, bigger than Willow Creek. It was a reminder, a promise, that the past wasn't just a burden, it was a legacy. As the evening settled in, the town began to shift. People lingered, talking in small groups, their voices carrying a new weight. The diner stayed open late, Sarah pouring coffee for veterans who shared stories they hadn't told in years. The child who'd left the Daisy came back with her parents, bringing a handful of flowers this time, piling them at the plaque's base. Walter watched from a bench, Hayes beside him, and felt the town knitting itself together in a way it hadn't before. You started something today, Hayes said, breaking the silence. This place, it's going to remember. Walter chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. Didn't mean to start anything. Just wanted my coffee. Hayes grinned. You're a Marine, sir. You don't get to just have coffee. They sat in companionable silence, watching the square empty out. Walter thought of the box under his bed, the medals, the photographs, the dog tags he hadn't touched in years. He'd always thought of them as relics, pieces of a life he'd left behind. But now, they felt different. They were proof, not just of what he'd done, but of what he could still do. The next morning, Willow Creek woke to a new rhythm. The diner was busier than usual, the air thick with conversation. Sarah had pinned a photo of Walter behind the counter, taken from the ceremony, his face half turned, a faint smile breaking through. The plaque became a gathering point, a place where people left flowers, notes, even small tokens, a coin, a ribbon, a folded flag. The town council, spurred by the ceremony, voted to start a veterans support group, meeting weekly at the hall. Walter didn't plan to join, but Sarah told him she'd drag him there herself if he didn't show. Days turned to weeks, and the change held. Walter noticed it in small things, the way the barber offered him a free haircut, the way kids at the square nodded as he passed, the way the flag seemed to snap a little prouder above the courthouse. He started walking taller, his limp less noticeable, his eyes meeting those of strangers instead of sliding away. One afternoon, he found himself back at the plaque, alone this time. The flowers had piled up, a colorful mess of gratitude. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the letter one last time. He didn't read it, didn't need to. Instead, he tucked it beneath a stone at the plaque's base, a quiet offering to the men he'd lost, to the boy he'd been. As he walked away, the square felt alive, the air sharp with the scent of coffee, and the promise of winter. Walter Grayson, Corporal, United States Marine Corps, felt the weight of his name, not as a burden, but as a gift. This is the second part of Walter Grayson's story, a testament to the power of seeing the unseen, of honoring those who carry their sacrifices in silence. At Hoffman's Stories, we tell tales that remind us to pause, to listen, to act with kindness. Subscribe to discover more stories that celebrate the quiet heroes in our communities, and let's keep the legacy of respect alive. The ceremony continued, but Walter barely heard it. He stood by the plaque, the letter still in his pocket, its words no longer a burden but a bridge. He thought of Hill 875, of the men he'd saved, the ones he couldn't. He thought of his mother, reading his words in a farmhouse long gone, and he thought of this moment, this town, this captain who'd seen him when no one else had. As the crowd dispersed, Hayes stayed by his side. "You gave me something to aim for, sir," he said. "I hope you know that." Walter looked at him, seeing the boy he'd been, the man he'd become. "You've done enough," he said, his voice rough but steady. "More than enough." The sun climbed higher, warming the square. Walter lingered by the plaque, his fingers tracing the letters of his name. For the first time in decades, he felt seen, not as a hero, but as a man who'd done his best.